Welcome to the Food Junkies Podcast. Here, we aim to bring you the experience, strength, and hope of professionals working on the front lines in the field of food addiction. Our mission is to educate you, the listener, and increase overall awareness about food addiction as a recognized disorder. Here, we discuss all things recovery, exploring the many pathways people take towards abstinence in order to achieve a health-forward lifestyle. We hope to inspire you to thrive rather than just survive. So stay positive, make a change for yourself, and share your journey with others. And hopefully the message will spread.
David Kessler, author of End of Overeating, is here to talk to us about his new book, Diet, Drugs and Dopamine. Welcome to the Food Junkies Podcast. My name is Dr. Vera Tarman, and I am your co-host today, along with Clarissa Kennedy. Today, we speak with the noted author, Dr. David Kessler. Dr. Kessler is a pediatrician and has been Dean of Medical Schools at Yale and University of California. He is a graduate of Amherst College, the University of Chicago Law School, and Harvard Medical School. Most recently, he served as Chief Science Officer of the White House COVID-19 response team and previously served as Commissioner of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. He is author of the New York Times bestseller, The End of Overeating, as well as other books, Fast Carbs, Slow Carbs, and Food or Fiction. Of particular interest to us at Food Junkies Podcast is his most recent book, Diet, Drugs and Dopamine, The New Science on Achieving a Healthy Weight. Welcome, Dr. David Kessler.
It's wonderful to meet you.
You've been a hero in the food addiction world, and so we are so glad that you are meeting with us here today.
I think you're in the book.
Yeah, as you said, yes.
I think the word was trailblazer. Is that fair?
Sure, I'll go with that. Thank you.
You're going to tell me what I got wrong, I hope.
No, this is not about that. This is about showcasing you and your wonderful work. So let's just jump in. We've been in contact in the past when I sent you an email long ago saying, why don't you call, in the book, The End of Overeating, why don't you call this thing what it is, addiction? And you had said then, no, I don't want to do that. That's going to be too offensive to people. But in this book, you have it flat out. This is addiction. So what was your aha moment from deciding to call something hyper-palatable to just frankly addiction?
I think if my memory serves me right, when I did The End of Overeating, what was it, about 2008, 2009, you're right, the hard copy did not use the word addiction. I think in the paperback, when the paperback came out, if I'm right, I have to go back and look at the preface, I used the word addiction. I think going back to now the 15 years since the two books, the field of food reward, I think, has taken off over that last 15 years. You, certainly, others. I think the people come up to me and say, hey, that End of Overeating, these are scientists, neurobiologists. I became very interested in the reward circuits. And I think that, as I see it, as you have taught us, the central elements, this cue-induced wanting, this craving, this relapse, we can talk about it, are central elements of addiction. I wonder whether, when you asked me, why now? One of the key moments for me was this issue when I went to study not just overeating, which was the end of the first book, but I went to try to understand weight, which is obviously related, but a little different. Fair? And I kept on gaining weight and losing weight over my lifetime. And this issue of weight regain, I would lose weight. I thought I was done. And then at a certain point, I would regain that weight. And I guess it wasn't until relatively recently when I began to look at that regain as relapse. And why is it, if I've lost the weight, why can't I get it back? Now, there are elements of metabolic adaptation at play, but that does not, when you look at the data, account for all the weight regain. In fact, if anything, it's the hunger that comes back after you lose the weight, more than the change in energy expenditure that's really responsible for that regain. And I began to also look at and I looked at the data, when did I eat through the day and how I ate and why I ate. And began to see similarities. We did the investigation into tobacco when we were at FDA, and it became very apparent that I was using food to calm or to increase my focus, my cognitive attention at 10 o'clock at night if I have more work to do. And I wasn't using food for fuel. There were similarities between how I was using food and how a cigarette smoked. I'm not talking about the dopamine levels that are associated with amphetamine or cocaine. Both this, I call it ultra formulated, some call it highly processed, some call it highly palatable. Right? This food is psychoactive. It can change how we feel as nicotine. So once I had this issue of relapse and regain, as well as this understanding of the fact that both tobacco and these ultra formulated, these highly palatable foods they're self-administered, that being the test for addiction, I was there. It took me a little longer than you. Fair?
It seems to me that in the reading of your book, you got a lot of insight when you started the GLP-1 experience, the journey, and seeing how powerful hormones were and how they are so manipulated by the food industry. Am I right in that?
Well, let's talk about the GLP-1s for a moment. You and I will agree, right? They are the reward addictive circuits, right? They are at play. They are driving that fat and sugar, fat, sugar, and salt, put on every corner, made available 24/7, made socially acceptable to eat anytime. That cue-induced wanting, that craving, that relapse, that is central to those neural circuits. So the question is, how do these GLP-1 drugs work, right? They are very effective at losing weight while you're on them. And the question is, what's their mechanism? Sure, they mimic a naturally occurring hormone, but certainly in much higher doses than that naturally occurring hormone. And what I think is going on in significant part, and I don't think the companies have fully leveled with these pharmaceutical companies, have leveled with the American public on how they work. And people think there's some magic in these GLP-1 drugs, but for me, what they clearly were doing, and you look at the science, is they delay gastric emptying. Right? So they keep food in the stomach longer. And when food's in the stomach longer, and we've all experienced that, it just doesn't move through. We've experienced it if we get the flu, for example. Food doesn't move through, it stays in there, and you lose your appetite when you have the flu. I just don't want to put anything else in. I think we've all had food poisoning. Again, the GI tract shuts down, that motility shuts down, and food stays there. And I just go, I'm not going to put anything else in. I just can't, my stomach can't handle it. So there is this sort of spectrum of fullness, satiety, Thanksgiving fullness, right? And then I could push you to the edge of nausea, right? You can feel that edge of nausea. And then there's more overt GI distress, overt nausea and vomiting. So you have this spectrum of satiety, right? And for me, the food was staying in the stomach longer with these GI drugs. That's the result of both actions on the hindbrain and the gut, right? It's the area postrema, it's the nucleus solitarius, the NTS, part of the hindbrain. Those are part of the aversive system. So there's reward-based neural circuitry in our brain. And I think there's also these aversive circuits that slow down the gut. So what's powerful enough to overcome an addiction? I think we have to, at a certain point, I'd love to talk to you how we view addiction, because I think it's not the way many people think. It's part of all our brains. When I looked at what is powerful to overcome addiction, it's these aversive circuits. It tamps it down. I get to the point where the addiction gets tamped down because I don't want to put anything else in my stomach, because that takes me to the edge of nausea. So these drugs interestingly, they only work while you're on it. But for me, it's not unlike food poisoning. You remember, when's the last time you've ever had it? What, you have an episode of food poisoning?
Probably some point in my younger years.
Do you still remember it?
I remember the sensation, not the specifics.
I mean, many people, I still remember where you had food poisoning or something noxious, and it evokes a very clear memory that I stay away from it.
Yes.
In some ways, this slowing down the GI tract, I almost condition myself to want to eat smaller because I'm literally afraid of putting stuff in my stomach, too much stuff in my stomach, because that edge of nausea, I don't want to feel that way. So the question is, I think the great thing about these drugs, they're clearly not the panacea. There's no magic pill. They're only one tool. They have real adverse events, right? There's no cakewalk here. There's no walk in the park with these drugs. Is that they can change your relationship with food because they trigger those memories and condition you to eat small amounts. So I think you have this seesaw almost, right? You have the addictive circuits on the one hand, and you have these aversive circuits. And these aversive circuits can help you tamp down while you're on them. After you go off them, those feelings fade. And for most people, after a while, they gain back all the weight. Again, they are one tool, but I think they do help us elucidate what's going on.
Before we get too much into the GLP-1s, because I do want to ask you some questions about that, just to go back a little bit to your more personal story, but you wrote The End of Overeating, and then you had very prestigious positions, the FDA, the COVID-19, but you were still writing books. In between, you came up with this one. So you were continuing to work in this field on your private time. So how did the Diet, Drugs, and Dopamine book come about?
So as you mentioned, I had the privilege of co-leading Operation Warp Speed. COVID was an intense period of time.
Yeah.
Here I wrote The End of Overeating in 2008, 2009. I turned around, and when I was done, a very intense 2-3 year period for all of us. But I was at my computer 18-hour days, 7 days a week, trying to get 676 million vaccines out there within 5 miles of everybody, free to get it. We got to the other side of this pandemic, and I found that I had gained 40 pounds. I understood the reward pathways, but I really wanted to look at this question of weight and the mystery of weight. And the mystery of weight is tied to the mystery of food addiction, and can you crack food addiction? And I ended up, I think the GLP-1 drugs help you to tamp down, maybe not crack that food addiction, right? But they can help you change your relationship with food. But at the end, those addictive circuits are still there.
Okay, let's get now into your book. You mentioned...
You're not telling me what I got right and what I got wrong.
I don't know. I'm too awed by you to be telling you what...
No, seriously. I think I called you the trailblazer in the book. Right? You're asking me all these questions. Don't I get to ask? Do I have this right? What do you think?
Yes, I think you have it right. Absolutely. I really like how you phrase the book. I think Chrissy's going to jump in at some point around this. It's that you say it's one tool amongst many, especially because you acknowledge that you have to stay on these drugs. If a person doesn't want to, maybe they've conditioned themselves that they just don't like food anymore, and we want to like food. They may want to get off, and you suggest that they need some kind of a lifestyle management focus. Those of us in the food addiction world, initially with GLP-1s, were like, oh no, this is the quick fix, and our whole message is going to get lost in the excitement about the GLP-1s. But you very nicely say, yes, it's exciting, and yes, it does work. So you're not trashing them, but it's not enough. That's a perfect position that we want to position ourselves, and that you've done that for us.
I mean, that means a lot to me. I mean, that just coming from you, because I think trying to understand, again, let's just go back and see, to first principles. To me, the issue is not weight, right? It's not how big you are or how small you are. To me, the real issue is this problem of toxic fat that accumulates around the abdomen, this fat that gets into your liver, pancreas, right, into the heart, and causes this metabolic havoc, this metabolic chaos. And I think increasingly, you tell me, but I think cardiologists, nephrologists, neurologists, oncologists, everyone's waking up to the fact that this toxic fat, this metabolically active fat, this leaking of these free fatty acids and this fat accumulating in places where it's not supposed to be in certain organs it's not just that it's not good for us, it's not just that it's a risk factor, but it's causal in these diseases.
Yeah.
So we've gotten to the place where it became very hard to talk, I still think it's very hard to talk about weight. And especially there's a lot of progress from the body positivity.
Yes, you mentioned that. I was interested in that as well. Yeah.
And that body positivity movement, again, in the absence of anything that really worked, diets didn't work, right? Why didn't diets work? Because it's like that life preserver, right? You try to hold that life preserver around you underwater, and there are these forces, so these addictive forces, these metabolic forces, that life preserver eventually is going to pop back up. You could only white knuckle it for so long, right? And so we kept on telling people eat less, exercise more, and nobody could do it. Everybody failed. And it wasn't that eating less was not the right answer in some ways, right? Because if you have this excess fat, the only way you can get rid of it is to be in an energy deficit situation. So you got to eat less, but nobody could do it because these addictive and metabolic circuits counteracting. And so we told people to do stuff that didn't work. And in response to that, people just, hey, if I'm just going to gain back the weight, what good is this? Leave me alone. And again, there was all the shame and all the stigma and all this notion of this was my fault. The other good thing about the drugs is they clearly show the drugs work by biology. Now, whether they work directly on the addictive circuits or whether they just have these aversive circuits, the tamping down, we'll learn more exactly. They clearly show this is biology, this is not willpower. And that's the important thing about these drugs. We got to the place in this country where it became very hard to talk about weight. People, because of that shame and that stigma. And then the problem that you have is when you see the metabolic effects of this toxic fat, you go, hey, is there a way I can talk about that without talking about weight, without increasing the shame, without this stigma? So when you tell people it's not about willpower, it's the addictive circuits, it's these metabolic circuits, it's biology, and it's okay to get some help here, right? Why couldn't any of us keep the weight off? And we didn't have the tools. So now we have the tools. But again, I think it's going to be a while before we can really talk about this in a way that doesn't, how do I do this without increasing the stigma and shame?
It's interesting. You said we don't have the tools. So the GLP-1s are a really excellent tool, just as you said, to highlight that this is a hormonal issue and a reward issue. It's not willpower. And there's medication that proves that. That will now be common knowledge. Before that, we said the same thing, but we put the blame on big food, the food industry, which is creating these dopamine-enhancing drug foods. But that message is not an appealing one. If we say big food is creating this biological dynamic that is larger than willpower, and people say, no, that sounds crazy. But now we have the GLP-1s that are proving that is in fact the case. Yeah. When they want to get off or moderate their use or microdose their use, if they also acknowledge, yeah, it's the foods, we have to stop eating those foods.
But I think you're right. Look, you have one industry making billions of dollars making us sick. You have another industry making equal profits coming along to treat what that former industry does. There's something wrong with that picture. If you came down from Mars and saw what we were doing, you said, go fix that underlying cause. There is no doubt in my mind that these ultra-formulated foods are addictive, that GLP-1 drugs treat or tamp down that addiction. But the ultimate solution is to deal with these ultra-formulated foods. The only issue is I don't think for many of us, we don't have the time to wait till our food environment changes. It's not going to change immediately. I think that's ultimately the goal here. And that's why I wrote the book. We could say, hey, change the food environment, but we've been saying that for now 3-4 decades. And things are certainly they're not getting any better. Maybe a little in certain parts. There's improvement in the quality, but I wanted to give people the tools, or at least to understand what the journey was, if they wanted to help take care of their health before that food environment change.
Yeah. Yeah, as long as we don't let the big food industry off the hook.
Look, the food industry will say, hey, they're just giving people what they want. Fair? That's what they're going to say. And they're going to say, we did the investigation into the tobacco industry. We saw self-administration tests. We saw the manipulation of nicotine to achieve the kind of
you're the
dose.
guy.
Right, we did that. Here, that they say, hey, we just designed food to taste good. It's just, they designed food for the bliss point, right? The problem is what they did is they took the most salient substances out of the food, the fat, sugar, and salt. They left the structure aside, anything that slows down. That rapid absorption of that glucose, fructose, into our bodies overwhelms the metabolism. So you have both the addictive circuits at play as well as these metabolic circuits. I'm very concerned if you look at insulin levels. Hyperinsulinemia has doubled over the last 2-3 decades. I can't quite figure out which comes first, this toxic fat, this visceral adiposity. Does that cause insulin resistance in the hyperinsulinemia, or does the hyperinsulinemia cause that visceral toxic fat to accumulate? Either way, you get caught in these vicious cycles. And once you get caught in this vicious cycle of elevated insulin levels, toxic fat leaking out, getting into organs, being metabolically active, this insulin resistance, you're in a vicious cycle. It's going to be impossible to get out of. And that's why the American body is ill. When you look, this is not about addiction for the problem. The addiction keeps us feeding this. The problem is that only 12% of Americans, 12.2% of Americans are metabolically healthy. That's very scary. And that translates directly into cardiac, renal, liver disease, diabetes. Many forms of cancer about a dozen forms seem to be sensitive to this increase in hyperinsulinemia and grow probably faster in that environment, perhaps certain neurodegenerative diseases. So what is this addiction wrought, right? It's this real chronic effect on chronic disease.
It sounds to me as a public health measure, GLP-1 should be made more accessible, cheaper.
But understand, again, they are one tool. No doubt people should have access to them, but you have to take those under good care. They shut down, these aversive circuits are very powerful. If you look and you ask yourself, how much do people eat when they take these GLP-1s?
Yeah, not much.
But if you go look for the data, my sense is that a good percentage of the people are eating less than 1,000 calories.
Yeah, I think you quoted 600 or 800 calories.
And that's semi-starvation. And that George Blackburn, the great obesity doc at Harvard, used to admit people to the hospital and follow the metabolism very carefully because there's dehydration, there's a whole set of metabolic issues when you lose weight very rapidly. Yes, if you're under good care, it could be done safely. But the problem with the GLP-1 drugs is that there's no end game. And that's true for diet. It's true. There's just no end game. They only work when you're on them. And the fact is, data that I'm seeing suggests that only if you look at the average length of time somebody's on these GLP-1s in the United States is about 8-9 months. And now about 20% will go back on. But if these drugs only work while you're on them, and we say, and people are on them only 9 months, 3-4 years from now, we're going to go, people spent thousands of dollars. They took these drugs. They were on them 8-9 months. They lost the weight, and then they gained back the majority of that weight. And this was one big failure. So unless we put this together and give people the tools, I am not a big fan of just letting these GLP-1 drugs out there without the proper care, without the fact that they are fine if you use them to change your relationship with food long term. But we got to figure out, or at least get the data. And I think my old agency has to do a better job of getting these companies to figure out how we can use these drugs safely in the real world. People for whatever reason, they are very expensive still today. Price is coming down a little, but these drugs are expensive. They are injectable. People just don't want, the reality is they work through some of these adverse events, right? Yes, they may taper off over time. Again, I think we have to realize either fix the food environment or give people a complete set of tools so this will work for them over the duration. And look, and the other thing I think we have to recognize is, and I am convinced of this, that again, without good care, these drugs run a risk of increasing eating disorders. Now, I think I'd love your view. I think everybody is subject to disordered eating who struggle. By definition, food addiction is at the heart of these eating disorders, but
absolutely. If we're eating the foods of today, which are addictive, as you said yourself, made hyperpalatable, of course, everybody.
I understand there's other comorbidities associated. I'm very respectful to our eating disorder colleagues, but you use the word food addiction and they freak out because they think that, you tell me what your experience, they think that the answer to that is only abstinence. Look, the enemy is not food. The enemy is these ultra formulated.
Yeah. I'm actually curious. There's been a recent submission to the DSM for ultra processed food use disorder. I'm also on a team that's working to put one to the ICD for a similar thing. And we are hoping, because we want to bridge the gap between eating disorders and food addiction world, to be able to come together and highlight the people who are struggling the most with ultra processed food addiction or food use disorder. Do you think that it's once recognized that this will shift things like it did for people with their understanding of tobacco, and then allow people to maybe have that compassion piece to say, oh, this isn't my moral failing. This is something wrong with the foods. And then we didn't stop making cigarettes. So we're not going to stop making big food. That's not going to go anywhere. But will it shift will they be able to see it for what it is?
So I think we have to go back and help educate people what we mean by addiction and what we mean by food addiction. Addiction is not about the weak or the downtrodden. It is not, I'm not sure that food addiction means that our brains are not working well. I think that if anything, I think food addiction is a result of the fact that our brains are working too well.
Really well, yeah.
Because you and I understand that for much of human history, there was no guarantee of when the next meal would arise. So our biological systems were designed for us to be able to seek out the sweetest and most energy-dense foods, shift the environment from one of scarcity to abundance, right? From the lack of energy being available to these energy-dense, highly palatable foods. I think that, is it the DSM, or is there something... Is my brain not functioning well on this environment, or is it working too well? To me, the person I want to study is the person who has no idea what we're talking about, for whom this ultra-formulated food is not highly salient, for who has no problems not focusing. Look, we all are wired to focus on the most salient stimuli and environment, and I guess for many people, it's not food. For a certain percentage, for what is it, 15%, 20%, who just look and they say, hey, food addiction, that can't possibly be real. But for anyone who's tried to resist, anyone who's gained weight and lost weight repeatedly, right, that pull of food is very real. So again, is it that something's broken in food addiction? Right. Certainly, ultimately, the end result is that toxic fat shouldn't be in my liver. It shouldn't be in my pancreas. It shouldn't be in my heart. Right. But my attention is all this. I think in some ways this is becoming. People are understanding this. They're using terms like food noise. Food noise gets tamped down. What's food noise? Food noise is probably just cue-induced wanting.
Craving.
It's craving and it tamps down. So that's the addictive circus. So it's basically, they're saying it, right? These drugs. I think that I am humbled in some ways by the variability, by the individual, the fact that there's great variability, right? That we all begin this journey separately. But I think we have to realize these reward circuits, these addictive circuits are at work in all of us. And then we change, this food environment is where it comes out, right? I think that's what has to be recognized. And I think we're getting there. right?
I am also wondering, you mentioned like this lifestyle management, and that's something that we definitely teach in addiction recovery is how do we manage our emotions? How do we tolerate distress? All of those tools we really give people. If I now have a drug that makes me so I don't have to do all that work, because addiction recovery is a hard sell and lifestyle management is a hard sell. It's a lot of work, right? It's being mindful like so much of the day. There is these programs out there which teach people and support people in this way. But how do we get people to come alongside and connect to them?
I think in the end of the day, I have in the book, there's a seesaw in this diagram where you have the reward circuits, these addictive circuits, and then you have these satiety circuits. So I can tamp down that addiction. If I take you to the edge of nausea, right, that's going to work, right? Now, or at least a sense of fullness or quieting down that cue-induced wanting. I think that just because I think you referred to earlier to the hormonal nature, just because I was not, my degree of satiety after I ate doesn't give me that sense of fullness, doesn't tamp me down. And that's biology. And I wasn't born with the genes that give me that satiety, that feeling to shut that down. I shouldn't be, there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, I'm going to use some biology, use some pharmacology to fill in that gap and use that as a tool. But I think for me, the goal is when I go on these drugs, I don't want to put large amounts of food in my stomach. I don't want to put heavy things that are just going to sit there, that's going to make me feel ill. So I condition myself to eat differently. And then the question is, can that carry over?
Yes, I wondered
when I'm off the drug? And the fact is that probably will fade over time, those memories. So maybe I need it then go back on it for a period of time, the drug, and I've done this. I'm not in favor of doing this without the data, without FDA requiring, is that safe? Is it going to work over the long haul? What do we know about intermittent use? But this is about changing your relationship with food. And if my biological set points, my settling points are such that I think we have to realize there was never a weight set point. Maybe there are appetite settling.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, your concept of set point and settling point.
Everyone said I was gaining back the weight, so there had to be a weight set point. But that's just because the addictive circuits are there. That's because the metabolic circuits are there that take me back. There are a lot of these different forces, and that's why I call it a settling point. But I'm not sure there is a weight settling point. I think there is an appetite settling point, right, where we all have different, in this ultra-formulated food, how much we're captured by this and how much these addictive circuits trigger us. I think that's where there's a great variability. And for those of us who end up captured by this stuff, I got to tamp those down and trigger those aversive circuits, and it'll help me condition myself. It's one tool.
If the person avoids eating the ultra-processed foods, our own natural adverse systems will kick in. For example, I don't want to eat that many Brussels sprouts because I would just be too full. Potentially, I see that the GLP-1s are a useful bridge for people to get off the ultra-formulated foods into the natural foods where our own natural systems can regain their strength.
Yes, but look, I think the fact is that there's so many forces at play when you get into both these addictive circuits and these metabolic circuits. I think when we're caught in this hyperinsulinemic trap that results from eating all these ultra-formulated foods, it's very hard to get out of that, right?
Yeah, that's where the GLP-1s are excellent.
They hold food in the stomach longer. That slows down the absorption. That not only makes me not tamp down the addictive circuits, but that helps the glucose absorption is less because food's in the stomach, it's not as rapidly getting through the duodenum and being absorbed.
Can you speak to the dark side of addiction? You mentioned something about that.
That's my friend George Koob. That's the opponent process.
The aversive part, right?
There's an A process and there's the B process, and that B process takes hold. Is that a dopamine trough, George? When does it get locked in? When does that cue-induced learning just go from just learning to I need it, I want it? And I think in essence, that dark side is, if I understand Dr. Koo and what they mean by that, I think for many people, they don't understand food addiction because the food is this ultra-formulated food is available. They can have access to it. They can get bigger and bigger. They get to some kind of settling point, obviously. But it's only, that dark side only happens when you try to go without. That's when you realize that addiction sets hold. So it is that's when you go, I need that in order to feel well. I want that. And you only sense that if it's fully accessible all the time. You don't even sense that wanting, that needing. It's only when you try to go without that B process becomes apparent. But that B process, I need it, I want it, that craving, that relapse, I think is the heart of what we're talking about.
And another thing that is starting to become evident with the use of GLP-1s, I don't know if you've had experience with this, but is the anhedonic effect that might happen for some people, that you get the lack of food noise, but you also get the lack of just other noise, like the pleasures of life, and a flattening experience in general. Was that your experience, and what do you say to that?
So I think that if you go back and you look at the initial experiments with laboratory animals, with the early molecules, obviously these were at different doses with the GLP-1s. When they injected these into animals, again, different doses, different molecules, or some of the predecessor earlier synthesized molecules. When they injected these into animals, these animals didn't move. They coined a term about 2 decades ago. They were associated with these GLP-1s called visceral malaise. What do I malaise? Just feeling lousy. Visceral. It was just, these animals weren't moving. Now, what the drug companies did, to their credit, is they figured out how to titrate these doses, right? To me, what they do is, and I think we all experience this, if you keep food in your stomach longer, GI tract's not moving, we're all going to experience that in a different way. And I think there are upstream effects on the brain too, no doubt, because that GI tract, that slowing is a result of these aversive circuits in the hindbrain. So I think there's great variability. I think if you can get these drugs to get you to that point where you don't want to put more food in your stomach, right? I think that's great. If you get too far over, I think that's obviously people are not going to be able to tolerate this. And I think we're going to have to see, do these drugs have a direct effect on the reward circuits, on the pleasure circuits, or is it just primarily through the GI tract and these aversive circuits? We're going to see whether they actually can tamp down alcohol, other substance overuse conditions. Are they going to get me not to go shopping as much? In gambling, can they tamp down certain of the behavioral addictions? And I think the jury is out. No doubt, if I increase food in your stomach, there's going to be some general malaise associated. I didn't experience a lack of pleasure, right? I think there are certain systemic, I think these drugs do work on these aversive circuits, and they can get you to, for me, I had a hard time with temperature regulation. I would have chills when I would take this. And I think companies don't even report that, but scientists who inject these into laboratory animals, they knew when they were doing the placebo-controlled trials, they just touched the tail of these animals, and if they were cold, they knew they had the drug. So there's effects on temperature regulation. That's all part of the aversive, that hindbrain part. So I think the jury is out whether it's going to cause this anhedonia in general.
I'm wondering, Dr. Kessler, just about, so us as food addiction, we work in the field, we're professionals, we're here to help people. How do we get our message out there so that people can hear it and not be resistant to it? We now there's so many papers on ultra processed foods and how addictive they are. There's people like you coming out and saying these foods are addictive. So people are naming it, but we're just here waiting to help and support people, whether they're on GLP-1s, and teach them the tool. It's all very complementary. So what can we do to elevate what we're doing in the field and help people with this?
So it's a journey, right, for people. I think people want help. People realize again, for some, it's a question of weight. Again, for me, it's a question of health. But I think we realize that the American body is ill and we need to help it. And anything you can do that helps people get there and not feel shame and stigma, stipulating that this is not about willpower, that this is not about weakness, or this is not my fault, but giving me the tools that I have, give me access to these drugs, give me that I can afford these drugs, but give me good care. And what does that care mean? Giving good medical care to make sure that the benefits of these drugs outweigh their risks, that we manage any adverse events. But I think help me eat. How should I eat when I'm on these drugs? How can I carry that over to if I want to go off these drugs? How can I keep the weight loss? I think we just got to give people the tools so that they can reclaim their health. I think that's the bottom line. I think that there's no doubt that we tell people to avoid these ultra-formulated foods, but it's almost like telling them eat less, exercise more, right? They can't do it, right? Because of these addictive circuits. And I could hold that life preserver down. I could white knuckle it. I could deprive myself of this stuff. But if I don't change those addictive circuits, are they ever going to change? Or I'm just going to be able to tamp them down? Am I ever going to get rid of them? I don't think so.
So is what you're saying then maybe it might be wise for us to find ways to pair with physicians prescribing these medications and be offering these education about food addiction and the lifestyle management tools that work for the clients that the communities we support.
So I think there needs to be, if we as professionals can't get it right, how does the public understand this? So you're right. I think you're just bringing the endocrinologists, the obesity medicine docs, just getting them to agree on how these drugs work. And then add to that the dietitians, nutritionists, eating disorder, food addiction specialists, bring those together. And I think there is a convergence against on these ultra-formulated foods. But I think people want tools today.
Now, you talk about culinary medicine. I'm assuming that's one of the tools that you would like to see.
If you're beholden to all your food can come being prepared from someone else, then good luck. So culinary medicine lets you take back control. The reality, though, is that it still takes time, and people don't have time, nor do they have the skills. So I think, look, there's no magic bullet here or one thing that's going to work for everybody. I've taken this weight off again. I gained 40 pounds, I said, after Warp Speed, and I've lost about 60 total, and I've been able to maintain it through today. I think that, for me, the real big difference is once I lost it, then the work really begins.
Yeah.
And so you got to get people to get the weight off, but then you got to give them the tools to maintain it. And and no one explains that to people.
So that kind of leads me to my next closing question, which is, what do you hope that the book will do? Your End of Overeating was a phenomenal message. What are you hoping for this book?
I wanted to help explain to people how this mystery of weight. And I wanted them to be able to give them the tools so they could begin this journey and that they could reclaim their health. What I care about, there is an incredible opportunity to reclaim our health. The number of people out there that are ill because of metabolic disease is overwhelming. And this cardiac kit, it's starting in children, right? And it's a lifelong, and it's cumulative, and it's scary at what it's going to do ultimately to whether we can afford the consequences from this.
You even talk about the legacy of obesity.
Exactly. And being able to let them understand what it takes to do this and just get them to the point where they can ask for help and they understand that there needs to be a team to do this, to tamp down these addictive circuits. Yes, it begins with these addictive circuits, but now how do I tamp these down? And there's no quick fix there. It's a combination of nutrition therapy, behavioral therapy, physical activity, and now pharmacology. But what I wanted to show people is they could put it together Because again, no one tool is going to work for the duration. Yes, I can go on this diet and hold it down, but we get bored with life changes. I can only do certain things for so long. That's just the reality. But if I can put together all these tools, and I can give them now a very powerful biological tool, right? It's almost, again, it's a crutch, but there should be no embarrassment about using that to help fix the biology.
We are so grateful for the time we've had with you. And we do have a signature question, which we're hoping you would be open to answering. And it is, if you could tell a younger version of yourself, so younger David, who was struggling with overeating and or obesity, what advice with what you know now would you tell him?
That we can crack that mystery of weight, that it is not a one and done. It's not, when you lose that weight and you're at your healthy weight, that's where the work begins. We can tamp down food addiction. We can use the GLP-1 drugs to crack that food addiction, but you have to use those GLP-1 drugs along with other tools to change your relationship with foods ultimately. And it's a journey. It's not going to be, it's not easy, because these addictive circuits are always there. Congratulations on what you've done over the last, now 3-4 decades, right, of work. You should be very proud. I cite you as trailblazers. My goal was just trying to put it together. When you look at the book, I think there are probably hundreds of experts cited, and to bring those voices together. Unfortunately, we don't always speak to each other. It's a complicated world. We tend to live in our silos. But for the patient who is struggling, we can reclaim our health. We finally have the tools that can help us fix it. You just need to get help. And we have to put those tools to good use and use those wisely and understand, again, there's no perfect tool here.
That's great. Thank you. And your book is a great synthesis of all of those silos so that the patient can actually have one source to go to. Thank you so much.
Coming from you, that just means an enormous amount.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for joining us this week on Food Junkies Recovery from Food Addiction. Make sure to join our Facebook group, Sugar Free for Life Support Group, I'm Sweet Enough. Molly and Clarissa are food addiction professionals who offer one-to-one counseling and group coaching through Sweet Sobriety. Please subscribe to our show so you never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in today's episode, we'd appreciate you leaving us a review on your favorite platform. Your feedback helps grow our show and allows us to reach others who need to hear this message of recovery. Don't forget to pick up a copy of Dr. Tarman's book, Food Junkies. And as Vera always says, the power is ours.